killing my Trudy. I will never forgive Cynthia for that.
That is about as low as you can get. But didn't we all tell you she was bad news from the start? You're just a country boy like us, Frank. That wife of yours is a city girl, through and through.
This is divorce court, presided over by Judge William Keene. In the case we are about to see, Cynthia Boltz is suing her husband of 4 years, Frank Boltz, for divorce on the grounds of mental and physical cruelty. Frank Boltz is countersuing on the ground of mental cruelty.
Here's this case of Boltz versus Boltz now. Miss Montgomery, are you going to make an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. 3 years ago, Mr. Boltz abruptly left a promising career in the city, made his wife give up her jewelry store business, and moved them to a farm in the country. All this Mrs. Boltz did out of love. But Mr. Boltz became obsessed with the farm, making his wife work like a slave nearly 12 hours a day, nearly killing her. He alienated her friends from her. He ostracized her from the community, making her life a living hell. Mrs. Boltz seeks a divorce on the grounds of physical and mental cruelty. She asks for 70% of the marital assets valued at $100,000 and that the farm be sold and split 50-50. Thank you.
Mr. Willingham, are you going to reserve your opening statement or make it now?
I'll make it now, Your Honor, saying that Mr. Boltz took his wife to the country to build a future. It was a beautiful place to raise the family that she said she wanted. But Mrs. Boltz, at first, said she'd go. Then she started taking it out on her husband, getting back at him for the move. She refused to have children. She even refused to have sexual relations. Not content just to make their family life hell, Judge, she started to wreck the farm itself. She even killed the cow that his mother had raised. Her only interest was for his money. That's witnessed by her plea for 50% of the farm. My client asked for this divorce on the ground of mental cruelty. He requests 75% of the marital assets, and he asked that none of the farm go to her. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Now, counsel, I've got to finish this case today. I start my vacation tomorrow, and those fish wait for no man. Call your first witness.
I call Cynthia Boltz.
Step forward.
Now taking the stand is the plaintiff, Cynthia Boltz, who still co-owns the artist's jewelry store she once ran, located here in town. For the past 3 years of marriage, she's worked on the farm her husband inherited. Testimony is about to begin.
I do.
Mrs. Boltz, when did you meet your husband?
My friend and I hired him to be the accountant for our jewelry store business. He was young, but he came highly recommended, and he was brilliant. He was also the sweetest man I'd ever met. I don't usually mix business with pleasure, but I guess it was love at first sight because, well, we only dated for 7 months before we were married.
What was your marriage like at first?
It was wonderful. And then Frank's parents died in a car accident and left him that dairy farm. It took him a long time to think about dealing with it. I just assumed that he would sell it or have someone else manage it for him. But no, not Frank. He sold the lease on our penthouse without even telling me. I had to give up running my jewelry store and say goodbye to all of my friends in the space of 2 days. I was in too much of a shock to argue about it.
What was life like when you first moved onto the dairy farm?
Well, the countryside was beautiful. And the farm was very modern, and yet still quaint in a lot of ways. But during that first week, Frank fired everyone that was working for him. He said he wanted to do it in his own way. Now, I might add that he left the farm and his family when he was only 16 years old. I doubted very much that he knew how to run a farm, but I stuck by his decision. Well, till the next Monday morning when he woke me up at 4 a.m. I mean, I thought the house was on fire or something, but he said, "Get up, get to work."
And what were your duties?
Well, first of all, I had to fix him this monstrous breakfast. It was still pitch dark outside. And then as the sun was rising, he pushed me outside, shoved a pail into my hand, and said I had to learn how to milk a cow. Well, I pointed out to him that we had all of the modern machinery, which made it so that you didn't have to do this old McDonald's stuff. But he just said to me, "Don't sass your boss." Milk the cows, feed them, clean the barn. I did it all, and Frank watched.
Did you find these duties difficult?
Difficult, yes. It was like being tortured 24 hours a day. Every day for 3 years, up at 4 a.m., fix breakfast, work on the farm until dusk, then come in and make this huge dinner for Frank, and then be pushed into bed by 9 p.m. I forgot what it was like to read a good book, to get dressed up, to go dancing, to have cocktails. All I knew was cows, and I knew I was miserable.
Did you talk to your husband about this?
My boss, you mean? Yes, I tried to. And all he said was, "You'll get used to it. You'll learn to love it." And then this one day, this old cow that his mom had raised, well, she wandered into this old rickety outbuilding, and she got herself killed. Well, I felt terrible about it. But Frank, he got crazy. And he accused me of killing the cow, and he said that I would pay for it. That night when I came home from shoveling manure, the house was filled with all the neighboring farmers.
Why were they there?
Well, I soon found out it was some sort of a farm tribunal, and that I was the accused. Frank told them that I had killed the cow and that they were to pass sentence on me. Why, I felt like I was in some kind of bad movie or something. So they all stood there, and they just stared me up and down, and then said, "Your punishment will be a secret, and you'll find out about it in the morning."
And what did they mean?
Well, I thought I was in some kind of bad movie or a dream, and I would wake up from it. Well, I did. I woke up to Frank hog-tying me, and he hauled me outside. I was screaming. He threw me into the pig pen with the pigs and the manure, and he said, here's your new home." Well, I was hysterical. I got the ropes loose, and I just ran out of there. I mean, he's crazy, and he's vindictive, and he should pay for that.
Oh, you lying, Judge. She's the one that's insane.
All right, Mr. Boltz, I'll hear from you after I finish with your wife. Are you telling me the truth, Mrs. Boltz?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Gladly, Your Honor. Mrs. Boltz, didn't you tell your husband at the time you were married that you wanted to have several children?
Yes, I did. But I'm glad I didn't, because I can't imagine what he would have done to them.
And didn't you further tell him that you wanted to raise those children outside the city?
Well, yes, of course, but I meant the suburbs, not the boonies.
Isn't it true your husband only moved you to the farm because you said you wanted to go?
No, and I never would have said that if I'd known the hell it was going to be.
And isn't the main reason that you went because you fantasized yourself making millions of dollars in the dairy business?
Look, Frank said that our lifestyle would not have to change. He said that we would have money. All I wanted was happiness.
And you found out there was a little work involved, and you started to punish your husband, first by not sleeping with him, right?
No, I was exhausted from working all day. I had to move into the other room because he was forcing himself on my aching body.
And didn't your little campaign of terror include killing his favorite cow and then trying to set the farmhouse on fire?
No, he has claimed that. He's made that all up. He's crazy. He's trying to terrorize me.
About to testify for Cynthia Boltz is Shauna Shane, co-owner of her city jewelry store.
You and Mrs. Boltz started your jewelry store before she was married, is that correct?
Yes, and when Cynthia moved to the farm, I was shocked. Well, Cynthia said I should come up and visit, but I didn't hear from her for weeks and weeks. Whenever I'd phone, Frank would answer the phone and hang up on me. Well, finally, I was so worried, I decided to drop in unannounced. I'm not saying I'm psychic, but I saw I had good reason to have been worried for her.
What did you see?
Their farm was more like a plantation with Frank as the massa and Cynthia his slave. She'd lost 20 pounds. She could barely move. She was so sore from lifting tubs of milk. Oh, well, she just looked terrible. But worst of all, her spirit had been broken by Frank.
Did you talk to Mr. Boltz about this?
Yes, privately. And he said he was trying to break the city out of Cynthia through hard work. Then he grabbed me, shoved me towards the door and said I wasn't welcome. As a city friend, I'd pollute her. Well, I didn't see her again until after she left Frank.
Thank you. No further questions?
Cross-examination.
Miss Shane, can we be serious here? Didn't Mr. Boltz tell you that he was just trying to show his wife that life on the farm could be as pleasant and rewarding as city life?
Well, that's how he put it before he launched into how he was showing her by torturing her.
And when he asked you to be a good friend and help her out, didn't you say your only interest was to have Mrs. Boltz back in the city?
You bet that's what I said. Well, he was killing Cynthia. She wasn't safe out there.
Didn't you and Mrs. Boltz just spend a bank loan of about $25,000 expanding and remodeling your jewelry store?
Yes, Is there something wrong with that?
Haven't you been plotting all along with Mrs. Boltz to force her husband to sell the farm at any cost and use the proceeds to fund your jewelry store improvements?
Plotted? You're nuts. Well, Cynthia deserves everything after what she's been through.
No further questions, Your Honor.
You may step down. Is that the plaintiff's case?
Yes, sir, Your Honor, the plaintiff rests.
All right, let me hear from the defendant.
Thank you, Your Honor. I call Frank Boltz to the stand.
Come forward.
About to take the stand is Frank Boltz, the defendant. Mr. Boltz has been accused by his wife of making her a slave on the dairy farm he inherited during their marriage. Testimony is about to begin.
I do.
Mr. Boltz, did you enjoy your life in the city after you first married your wife?
Oh, not at all. Well, who could? I mean, it's noisy and filthy. No one wants to know you there unless they expect you to further their career somehow. Well, I'll admit I bought into it when I was younger. It is seductive. I mean, I had a good job and a penthouse and a beautiful wife. Everything except peace of mind. Well, Cynthia said she felt the same way then, and that's why we moved to the farm.
How was your life there when you first moved?
Oh, it was rough. Cynthia, she never stopped complaining from the moment we arrived. The farm was too small. The house was a shack, and how are these few cows ever going to make us rich? I never expected her to be old MacDonald's wife or anything like that, but as soon as she saw we weren't going to be the wealthy dairy baron she imagined us as, well, she took it out on me.
Can you tell us how she did that?
Well, first I let her remodel. So she threw all Mama's things out. Then she tried to hire a crew to rip down 2 sides of the house my dad built. I put my foot down then. And Cynthia said, if I have to live in this dump, at least it's going to be my way. Some attitude for a wife to have. Then when I tried to get her to help out on the farm, she really went ape then.
Ordered me to do everything, you mean?
All right, Mrs. Boltz, let me hear from your husband. Let's continue.
Did you force your wife to do all the chores as she claims?
Not at all. I did want her to learn a few basics so she'd feel more a part of things. But she's crazy saying I fired everyone. I had 10 men working for me. All Cynthia had to do was cook the meals and tend to Trudy. That's the cow Mama had raised as a pet. Well, she tended it all right. Tended it to death.
How'd she do that?
Well, Trudy had her own special barn, which we kept locked so she wouldn't wander out. And then one day I got a shock when Cynthia got up and said, I'm going to take care of all the chores today, so you relax. So I went into town to run a few errands. When I got back, it was too late. Cynthia sat at our table and, cold as ice, said, Trudy kicked the bucket. Somehow she managed to break Trudy's neck.
Move to strike, Your Honor. Unfounded.
All right, that last portion goes out. Let's continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. What happened next?
Well, the neighbors all came by the next day to pay their respects to Trudy. Everyone loved my ma, so they knew how hard it was for me to lose that cow. Well, Cynthia, she just laughed through the whole thing. And the next morning I woke up and smelled smoke. So I ran out to the kitchen, and the kitchen was on fire. One whole side of the house was aflame. Looked out the door, and I saw Cynthia.
What was she doing?
Applauding. I got out there, and I grabbed hold of her, and she fought me so hard, I admit I did have to use a rope to tie her hands. Then I set her down, and I ran back into the house to put the fire out. Well, I saved half the house. Meanwhile, Cynthia had gotten in a car and driven back to the city. That woman is violent.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Miss Montgomery, you may inquire.
Isn't it true that the kitchen fire started from a smoldering cigar butt in the waste can the day after your wife left?
No, she'd set the fire.
And didn't you attack your wife, tie her up, and throw her into the pig pen as a tribunal punishment?
No, she attacked me.
That's ridiculous. And why on earth would your wife want to kill that cow?
That's how vindictive she is. She hated that we weren't making millions.
Aren't you the vindictive one when you told your wife, I'll make you forget everything you ever loved about the city?
I meant I'd show her how great the country was. I wasn't being vindictive.
And speaking of not making millions, isn't that only because you got rid of all the modern machinery in favor of your wife doing all the work?
Oh, come on. I care about making a living. I kept the machines I needed. I just wanted to stay more in touch with the work.
Didn't you tell your wife that you preferred farming like they did it in the Middle Ages?
Well, yes. It was more spiritual then. I mean, farmers, they knew their animals, they knew their crops. It wasn't just machines doing all the work.
And isn't it true that you tortured your wife with physical and mental hardships in order to make your wife sway to your way of thinking?
No. I never wanted her to fall in love with farming. I just wanted her to be content to be my wife.
And aren't you making up all of these ridiculous accusations in a sadistic fixation to reprogram your wife?
Wrong. I tried to make her happy.
and she killed Trudy for it.
About to testify for Frank Boltz is Gus Green, a neighbor and farm owner.
Mr. Green, were you around the Boltz house much?
Yep. I went over there pretty often to visit Frank. His folks was about the best people around, and I wanted to keep an eye on their boy. Of course, I tried to like the missus, but she calls me goober and says I stink.
Did you ever witness Mrs. Boltz treating her husband badly?
Oh, yep, I sure did. I saw her kicking the cows with her high heels when she's supposed to be milking them. Frank says that ain't the way. So she takes off her shoe and starts hitting them over the head. And another time I saw her cut the cables to the auto milker. Broke it down for days. Just 'cause Frank asked her to go out there and check on the timing switch, see if it was set right. She'd do anything.
What do you know about the death of their cow, Trudy?
Nothing, except she did it. I saw her lead Trudy into that old outbuilding that's been condemned forever. Oh, yeah, she's a sly one. A couple minutes later, she comes running out yelling, "Frank, Frank, help!" Just so she had a cover story. Meanwhile, I go in there to get Trudy, and I found her in a hole, 1 story below. The hole had been mysteriously covered over with straw. Even if Frank had been home, he couldn't have rescued Trudy.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
You mentioned Mr. Boltz's folks. You're a pretty tight-knit little community, aren't you?
Yep, we care about each other.
So much so that you ostracized Cynthia Boltz from the very first day she arrived, didn't you?
Ain't so. Folks tried to be friendly to her, but she just hates people, if you ask me.
Well, I didn't. And speaking of being friendly and caring neighbors, if you saw Mrs. Boltz leading the sainted Trudy into an obviously dangerous situation, why didn't you stop her or go get her husband?
Well, we don't stick our nose where it don't belong. I tend to my own business.
Good for you, Mr. Green. And is there anything else you would like to tell this court you saw while you were minding your own business?
As a matter of fact, there is. I saw her drive up with a can of gasoline. She said she'd been to the self-serve. I bet that's what she used to set the fire the next day.
Strike, Your Honor, unfounded and
Just a minute. That last answer is stricken. Mrs. Boltz, you sit down and keep quiet. Now let's finish with this witness and let's finish with this case.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right, you may step down. Anything further from the defendant?
Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief recess to confer with this last witness.
All right, we'll take a 15-minute recess for that purpose.
Court has reconvened. In a surprising turn of events, the defense attorney has recalled Cynthia Boltz for further cross-examination.
Mrs. Boltz, didn't you go into the abandoned building the previous day and cover the hole in the floor with straw?
I've never even been in there, ever.
So you weren't so much interested in killing Trudy as you were in killing your husband.
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's trying to incriminate the witness.
Sustained.
Mrs. Boltz, the day before you left your husband, why did you fill the can with gas?
I don't remember doing that. I don't know. Maybe we needed
Maybe you were trying to kill your husband by setting the house on fire. Isn't that true?
No, I don't know. Again, trying to incriminate the witness.
All right, just a minute. Mr. Willingham, do you have any basis for these accusations?
No, sir, Your Honor. No further questions.
We now return to divorce court. Judge Keene has heard closing statements and is about to render his decision.
Well, I've never heard so much about a cow since I heard about Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over the lantern and starting the Chicago fire. I've never heard so many wild accusations thrown back and forth in a courtroom. You know, I've literally and actually tried cases involving the custody of a parrot and a monkey, but I've never had a case involving the death of a cow. Yet I have learned whenever a case is transferred in from Carby County, I can expect anything. What happened to the cow? What started the fire? I don't know. But Mrs. Boltz, I can tell you this. After you told me that wild tale about this tribunal, this kangaroo court that went on out at the farm, I have my suspicions. Mr. Boltz, I'm satisfied, had no motive to kill the cow. He had no motive to set fire to the farm that he loved. but someone who wanted to move back to the city might well have. But I'm not sure about that. What I'm sure about is there was no attempted murder, and I also am satisfied that Mrs. Boltz's accusations of physical cruelty committed by her husband are simply not true. I order a judgment of divorce in this case for Mr. Boltz on his cross-complaint on the grounds of mental cruelty. He will retain the family farm in its entirety, and insofar as the marital estate is concerned, with assets approximating $100,000, I will order that divided on the basis of 75%, 25% in his favor, and there will be no spousal support. What a way to start a vacation, hearing a case like this. And I guess now as I drive south and pass cows, as we will, I'll forever remember old Fruity. This course stands in recess.
Hotel accommodations for the divorce court staff have been provided by Travelodge Hotel at the Walt Disney World Village.